just an amazing aspect of storytelling. And that's fundamentally what keeping traditions alive in, and Makah culture is about as well. Is we refer to it as the living breath of our ancestors, that there's certain stories that we keep alive that are, much older than what we know as Christianity today. And a lot of my life work has really been, really based on that human element of telling stories from more of a personal perspective and drawing on similarities and observations, from other people when we're at the table for different reasons, perhaps even an opposing reason. And I found that storytelling really does a lot to, bring a viewer or an audience to gain a new appreciation through an experience in the way that the oral history has been taught, is that you bring the listener to witness an ancient event. And so then when you're bringing in a new listener, many generations after the event, you're bringing a new listener into sort of the witness of an ancient event as if they experience it themselves. That's like the essence and core of the integrity of oral history. Like some people say, you can't keep a story alive that long. Well, if you have the protocols of those sort of things also attached to even current works now, and when I do different things and different visualization exercises, issue prioritization, SWOT analysis, strategic planning, in all various ways of whether it's a community development initiative or it's a mitigation to a hazards place, or even if it's a issue prioritizations where people are coming to the table from opposing views. When we're able to find common ground, is when we are able to really find I guess a pathway towards either a preferred alternative or I guess in some cases neutrality, if somebody's really opposed to something until they realize a more holistic point of view. And then sometimes you really can't get a holistic point of view until you can appreciate the perspectives of some people that may be opposing what you're doing or may have a different idea on how to do something with a space. And one of my favorite exercises was sort of a community visioning exercise. Can't think of his name now, darn it all. But he worked in EPA and he had a visualization exercise. I'm not sure if he was aware of it before, but I think he further developed it in the means to where initially it was like for hazard site cleanups in poor and depressed neighborhoods, i.e. the notion of mitigating environmental racism, where you're not going to put a toxic waste dump in Beverly Hills, you're going to put it down in the ghetto. And when the people in that community have to deal with the aftermath, this process was developed for a community visioning exercise where everybody gets a chance to draw a picture or 2 or 3 pictures of what they'd like to see that place become. And then everybody gets to see everybody else's ideas. And then everybody gets to do a second generation of illustrations or pictures. So then we have a more common vision that's growing and cross-pollination of ideas. And then after that second generation of ideas are shared again, then once again, there's another way of tying that buy-in in a sense of, what's the emerging community consensus and a vision for how that place could become something new and different. When it's cleaned up, it's become part of, a safe and healthy, part of the neighborhood and community. And that sort of thing, it comes from a cartooning and, and illustrating sort of a background. And I think it resonates with some of the things I just shared about, like when I was growing up here in Nia Bay. I was immersed in tons of comic books, for 3 months out of the summer. And just the creative process, in my opinion, helped me, at the table, help to, I guess, verbally visualize things with people, maybe not as artistically. And, well, actually, I probably did. I shared a lot of drawings when I was at the table with a lot of different people too. But yeah, that's kind of, part of my background. And I think the influences that I had before I got into, more of a full-time profession as an artist. But you know, for me, it's something that it just resonates to the soul, like really soulful work, really sort of a benevolent nature of, you know, just artistic form. And even when you get into humor, you know, that's really a lot more, I guess, unless it's dark humor. It's really a lot more of a bonding experience for humans, you know, that I think in a lot of ways is universal. And even like telling jokes and you know, cartooning and illustration and jokes, I think humor is one of those things where, you know, the bare essence of what I was raised with, you know, is like crying is the purest form of prayer, and laughter is like the purest form of gratitude. And those are universal feelings that we all have. And no matter where you go on the earth, wherever I've been able to help people laugh and touch people to, you know, a sentimental feeling of like, yeah, this is who we are. We are people. It doesn't matter where we grew up and where we are, you know. So I think cartooning really is a, you know, an essential core to just being human. And I look at all the things, you know, I went to my first Comic-Con this Christmas season at Emerald City, and my girls were really happy, my youngest, to go. And you know, I got 5 children, and there's a couple of shows that we raised our kids with, like for family movie nights, or even in the evenings after dinner, stuff like that. We'd watch Avatar: Last Airbender was one of our favorite ones, and let's see, what was the other one? Star Wars, Clone Wars. God, can't think of any others off the top of my head, but when we got to the Comic-Con, we saw Ahsoka, who's you know, in the Star Wars Clone Wars series, the cartoon series. She's a Padawan to Anakin Skywalker's character, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's character is still involved, and it's like a weird, you know, mesh into that area. And then also, like, growing up with like a real patriarchal dominant narrative for my family history. I've got 4 daughters and 1 son, and I've been seeing the gender bender thing going on in a lot of things, even like in Coming to America 2. If I don't know if anybody saw that one, but it wasn't the first movie that kind of got into this concept in the modern era. But in the first Coming to America, Eddie Murphy's playing this character that's coming to America to sow his royal oats and find his wife. He goes to Queens, New York. Long story short, he doesn't have any sons, and he's got daughters. And the king of Zamunda is getting ready to die, and there's a challenger to the throne saying, your son doesn't have any sons. And so then it's you know, the tradition has to be broken, and you know, the new king or the king in waiting has to decide that. Long story short, you know, my daughter is taking a twist on some things that she wants to do. She's my oldest born. In my traditional way, she's my hakum, and so my name is Hawilthiyatook. And we have a story about the first whaler, and it kind of goes like these 2 chiefs got into a heated rivalry, because a lot of times, you know, the status of a chief and the wealth of the chief was demonstrated by how much he could give away or how much he could feed for people. And at this time, it was all based around seal hunting. And so they started hunting seals in an unsustainable manner, and it got harder and harder to outdo each other. And so they were kind of in this duel that was creating havoc on the local and then eventually the regional seal populations. And then the chief that was kind of realizing this, and it was his turn to try to outdo the first chief, he went to a mountain to pray for an answer. And on the mountain, he found this lake with a small ledge about 15 feet down in crystal clear water. And there just happened to be a little boulder sitting down there. And so he had an intuition that that's a spot to go to pray. And so he took a deep breath, dove down, grabbed that rock, sat there. And within that first breath, you know, he was getting ready to go for air, and he opened his eyes, and there was a small whale sitting in front of him, just floating in front of him. And he saw that as a sign, so he grabbed the whale, and he, just in that one breath and that one prayer, he went and took it to his home, and he put it by the head of his bed, and he, that night he intended to, dream what that meant. And in his dream, the whale came to him and said, "I know what you're trying to do, and I can offer you a way to hunt my people in the ocean that are much larger." And he told him to go to that same spot every day and pray like that. And you keep doing that, I'll keep bringing you those lessons, because you're going to have to learn a lot of lessons to be able to do this. And so then he did that. And over a period of time, the rival chief was wondering why he wasn't out searching and hunting for seals. The whole social network of messenger canoes and people in other villages keeping an eye out, because it was fun. Everybody wanted to see this. It was it was a big high intensity. And so then the rival chief started to spy on this chief with this new medicine he was working with. And then one day the chief came up for air, and his rival stood there, right there over the top of him, and was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And really, without thinking, the chief in this new lesson and learning this new medicine was so aflamed with it, he didn't really protect himself or think anything else other than just it was so cool, he wanted to share it. And when the rival chief thought he learned enough that he could take over that medicine, he decided he was going to be the first whaler, and he killed that chief right there in that water. And then he hit the body, and then he tried to go to that spot every time and start praying for that medicine. And then the eldest son of the slain chief was kind of wondering. He'd been in the scene for a long time. He'd been to all these potlatches. He was being groomed to be the next chief. And he knew, the family of his rival chief, his father's rival. And so then he began to spy on the rival chief that killed his dad. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew that his dad was gone, and he knew that his dad started praying in a new place. So he ended up confronting the chief in the same manner as the rival did before he killed his dad. And same thing, the rival chief was so aflame with this new medicine and this new power, he just blurted out everything. And then after a period of time, the son knew exactly what happened. He was like, "Oh, he killed my dad." He's thinking in his head. And now he's telling me everything that he was trying to steal from my dad. I think I know enough now. He killed him. And then he didn't say a word. He didn't tell anybody. He didn't tell anybody what he was doing or what he was up to. And this is where the story sort of ends, as he became the first whaler. But what my daughter wants to do is bring in the other half of the story, is like, what was the wife of that prince who is now seated as the chief with his dad dead, before his dad was able to manifest the new whaling teachings. So then his wife was the first matriarch of the first whaler. And the Hakum is, the eldest daughter of a hereditary chief. In a whaling tradition, a whaling Hakum has real special teachings on how to keep the medicine strong and project protection over the hunters when they're on the sea. A lot of traditions about women will not comb their hair when the men are out, to fear of breaking hair that might break a line out on the water. They lay still all the time, being cared for as if they are a whale that will not fight. And so there's a lot of teachings that happen. And so what my daughter's going to do with some of her illustrations based on this is she's going to be doing some amazing work to bring the matriarchal side of the whaling history into a stronger reality today. And I think it's just it's synonymous in a way to, I think how, these last few decades, women have really been emerging as much more of a powerhouse force in, and how society is contending with a lot of different issues. And when I was working on climate change issues and how social movements really aren't really going anywhere until you have gender balance in the movement, And one of the ones that really makes me think about, that essence of what that really is. And one of the most common, and I guess when at my youngest age, or when in my younger age, it was one of the largest phenomenons that I've seen in sort of a movement with mad mothers against drunk drivers. And my mom left my dad because of alcoholism. And my dad had a funny story one time. He was in Port Angeles and he lost count how many beers after about 18. And he got a DWI, and he got thrown into the drunk tank, and they took him before the judge, just, same next morning, like he's still drunk. And the judge was like, well, how many did you have, Mr. McCarty? He's like, oh, my dad was like, I don't know. I lost count after 18. Like, he didn't lie or nothing. The judge says, get out of here, but, that's a benevolent story because my dad didn't kill anybody in a car accident. And, but when you get the mad mothers against drunk drivers on, how bad it's been nationwide, that's a movement that drives home. And, the sacredness of, that gender balance is, we all are carried in a womb for 9 months before we come out into the world. Men cannot say that. And so there's a special nature about, balancing that matriarchal balance in society. And I think, with social media and, and the way, we cross gender barriers, cultural barriers, that, we resonate with the kid inside of each of us and all that stuff, So I don't know, it's pretty interesting to me. And then I have a friend, or I've got a cousin who's got a friend that did this thing called animal skins. And one of my cousin Aaron Parker, one of his friends, got on board with the Burke Museum. I guess the Burke Museum has $92 million to do a brand new Burke, and there's some kind of stimulus, COVID or something. I don't know what it is, but anyhow, my younger cousin has a former classmate from UW that's on the steering committee for helping to design how they design the next new Burke Museum. And before COVID hit, they were able to do this live painting exhibit at the Burke. And his friend Chris has, like an amazing projection thing in what they're doing. And they did like with the animal skins, they were taking the concept and notion that, we are spiritual entities animated in our bodies, just like animals are animated in the bodies. And we do this personification of the animal people. And we realize that, the soul essence, the soul filament, the filament of our souls and our bodies is from the same energy. And so, like, one of the things, like even the founding fathers of the United States sort of plagiarized the wisdoms of the noble savage in some of our founding documents. Like the Indian said, all things are created equal. And then the white man said, all men are created equal. And then in the fine print, only white men that own land are created equal, and only they can vote. And then we had women's suffrage not too long after that. And then, blacks got the right to vote and all that. But, the teachings, are pretty universal on this continent. And so when my cousin Hubie was talking about, like, they want to do this next animal skin, me and my daughter and Nana, who wants to do this story on the matriarchal roots to a wailing queen's traditions. We're taking this notion into the next edition of this animal skin concept, multimedia, and we're going to do like photo collages. We're going to take images of artwork and we're going to project it onto our faces in different backdrops. And we're also going to get sound and ambient background of storms and all the beauty out here in the Pacific Northwest corner. And then we're going to bring the cosmology of our teachings with, like, the Big Dipper in our cosmology is a skatefish. And there's a few other teachings about the stars and how we were able to navigate when we were so far offshore. We knew how the stars were associated to the mountaintops on how we could get home. But then also, if we have the skatefish in the sky as part of our cosmology, and we know the skatefish is in the ocean, so we're looking at this concept of how we'll project a sky presence, so people in the audience will be immersed, like the Van Gogh experience. They'll be immersed in a four-dimensional experience where there'll be projections on the ceiling of the cosmos, and then the air creatures, and then the surface water and down below. And the idea from what my daughter and my younger cousin want to be able to illustrate and convey through sound and music, storytelling and imagery is a potlatch experience. Well, coming back to that story about the first whaler, we are who we are because of where we come from, and our the habitats of our culture, in essence, is we are a manifestation of the natural world. And even in today's world, there are less than 5% of like strong indigenous cultures left on the planet, maybe population wise, but the diversity of cultures is really strong. But there's no coincidence that what's left of the natural biological diversity in the planet is closely associated with cultural diversity. So cultural survival and cultural diversity is symbiotic with biological diversity. And to explain that to people who have less than 3 centuries of experience in a place where ancestral bones are in some cases older than some of the civilizations that we read about in history books, keeping that oral history alive and then bringing it into a multimedia circle will sort of manifest in like, well, where in this world provides what we bring into a potlatch. And then when we bring a potlatch experience, I've got images and photographs and video of when a bunch of canoes came to another village, invited for a potlatch. We leave our territories or across the waters, we go to another village and we ask permission to come ashore. That's our cultural checks and balances. That's our cultural and traditional acknowledgement of boundaries and territories. And the keeper of the beach is the customs and immigration. And so we're going to experience that protocol for people to then come ashore and then get into the potlatch. So we're going to choreograph this in a way that will eventually, tell a pretty huge story. And coincidentally, I just got this job with Chief Seattle Club. I'm going to do about 200 feet of window art down in Pioneer Square. So we're just working on the final details of the design to get approved by the Pioneer Square Historic Preservation Board. And the concept that we came up with, there was already brickwork in the building that showed canoes moving in a certain direction. So then we immediately looked at that as like, we do salmon in the stream beneath the canoes going in the same direction. So we're going to do salmon in the stream. We're going to do all species of salmon: sockeye, chinook, coho, steelhead, pinks, chum, silvers, and do male female pairs, and do the reds in the stream bed. So you got little egg nests all the way in the bottom. You're going to have some eggs floating in the stream, like Nemo, Finding Nemo, when those eggs were gone and he was the only one left. And then with the changes in the windows, we're going to have like some of the size of the windows are different. And then we got little small windows next to the doors. So we're going to put in like boulder designs and then like deeper pools behind the boulders, like a real river is. And so the salmon in the stream, downtown Seattle, it's going to also tell a story about, the ecology of where we're at and what we're doing. A lot of my speeches in Seattle, were analogous to historical timeframes that people can't comprehend when we think in such short sound bites. We think in such short cycles of bipolar cycles in the White House, bipolar cycles in Congress. But the long-term observation and long-term memory is that the whole Seattle area was once, you know, a really rich and lush watershed. And I'll show you guys if you can see it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And look at the Duwamish. Now that's all shipyards. It's all shipping containers and concrete. It's a heat island effect. And the whole area here now with all the concrete and pavement and then the mismanagement of water, you know, the Brian Gladysby was one of my colleagues from Swinomish, and the river system that he grew up to become a steward of, he said was the last river system in the lower 48 to have all species of salmon in there. Well, I know Lake Washington, Duwamish, that whole area used to have it. So we're going to tell that story. And, you know, it's going to be, you know, part of that experience. And then in doing this, the illustrations we're working on, the storytelling we're working on, we're going to be able to integrate that into this animal skin experience as well. So there's a lot of synergy in some of the things that we're working on, and the storytelling aspect is becoming, you know, pretty exciting. And now with the digital age and my daughter's real expertise in this, she's already done like a silk scarf design of a big dipper with a skatefish, and she made a constellation out of it. And then I'm gonna follow her lead and do a little dipper design for halibut. And I'm not trying to make anything up other than just I'm just gonna make that association. I'm not gonna do some more, you know, of that what you call. But when I was growing up, my mom had a real fascination with Native American intellectuals and academia. And one of her favorite faculty or one of her favorite professors was a guy named Vine Deloria. He wrote a book called Custer Died for Your Sins. And it was a total spin-off of, you know, of the white racism genocide, you know, and some kind of a intellectual twist on how Jesus died for the sins of Western civilization's imperialism to take over the planet. So Vine Deloria, I had a chance to meet him when I was tribal council, and I was actually a witness to the gifting of his entire collection to the Northwest Indian College. They even have a Vine Deloria symposium in his name. So he's, you know, in the annals of, you know, Native American rights activists and the advances in Native American studies of Native study and what we need to study. He had a book called Spirit and Reason, and it was one of his last ones. And Spirit and Reason, I think, in a way, is really, you know, another way of framing that, you know, the essence of the animal skin. That through spirit and reason, we can personify ourselves and look at the soul within the animals around us. But one of the things that Vine Deloria talked to me about, and I'm not sure how many other people have been talked to about this. I asked people that know him, and they haven't heard him say it, but there's a thing he wanted to do, and I think he was inviting me to take the baton for that, was to convene an intertribal and pan-indigenous thing on the cosmos. And coincidentally, you know, being a Native American activist and climate change leader, I was involved with the Western Pacific Fisheries Management Council and the indigenous people there, and going to education conferences. And I met a guy named Nayoa Thomas, and he was a huge leader in the Hokuleo revival of the canoes. And by that time, no living Hawaiian remembered how to do stellar navigation. But they knew that the stellar navigation routes, you know, came from the same culture in Polynesia. And they found this really old man way like in Vanuatu. And they had to find a French-speaking person that could speak the native language because they only spoke his language. Then they had to find somebody that can translate from French to English. And then Nio Thomas told the story, translated from his own experience being there, that in addition to knowing the flora and fauna around you, you can smell an island before you can see it if you know what you're smelling for. And the way the stars move at the different times of year, there's a way that between spirit and reason, you read what you're there, but the spirit side, and this is what was most important from this elder, says no matter what, you always keep your destination in front of you. And like even in just the course of what we do when we set intention, we always set that intention to keep our destination, our goals and objectives in front of us. And another one of my colleagues, Vince Diaz, he had just recently published his dissertation back then after I was listening and meeting with Nio Thomas. And this guy his name is Vince Diaz. And what he did was his dissertation was really focused on the islands at risk to sea level rise. And he wanted to come up with a way to preserve this stellar navigation, particularly for islands that are most at risk to being lost to sea level rise, so that when the generations come back to their islands, once the world is back to a normal ocean level, that they'll have that knowledge to prepare. Just last week, I was on a webinar, and Vince Diaz now is a bit older. He's a tenured professor now at University of Minnesota. And what he's doing right now is phenomenal because he's digitizing this. He's got a virtual program that's built into stellar navigation training. And so seeing his dissertation, and then like 10, 12 years later, he's still moving forward. He's still keeping that destination in front of him. And I couldn't help but look at the parallels of how those stories influenced me as a tribal leader, emerging into beyond a national scene and looking at the things that I was working on, the things that I was doing. And so when I think about like the Makah territory, the usual and custom area of our space, it's an adjudicated marine space that we have senior policy influence. We have a vested economic influence, and we have a priceless umbilical cord to the cultural roots of where we come from. So there's a priceless cultural connection. In my life, I feel we've been able to maintain a balance of this. And also knowing that this has been one of the richest territories and how we've had to defend it so many different times. Like even one time, the Northern Nuu-chah-nulth hired Haida mercenaries to come take our territory because we're perched on such wealth. And a lot of people wanted it. And so there's a book you guys might want to read, The Sea is My Country by Joshua Reed. It really goes into the depth and how the fortitude and strength of our people, maintain the control of this place. And then when I first got elected, there were some people associated with the National Marine Sanctuary Group. And the National Marine Sanctuary system had a national agenda that they wanted to import values into our territory. And in some cases, they were extreme conservation values. And in a lot of places around the rest of the National Marine Fisheries jurisdictions, there's been major fisheries disasters and fisheries management disasters. But in my first year on council, I started seeing and hearing some of this pressure. And this is coming right after the heels of how our tribal government broke down the barriers to just get to the table to co-manage, already knowing that management was messed up and that we had a better system to manage because we manage multiple generations. We manage an integrated resource management paradigm. We don't press a lot of pressure on one species for single species exploitation. So we spread our dependence around the whole ecosystem around us. And all these other factors drove Western scientists to realize that Swift Shore is one of the 5 most dynamic marine ecologies on the planet for productivity and biological diversity, as well as highly migratory species come through here. Volumes and volumes of biomass pass through too. And so when I was thinking about Vince Diaz and some of the things that we were doing, because there's a lot of like emotionally driven gutter science that's driven for conservation agendas, and a lot of careers have been built on driving emotional arguments to change policies, regardless of whether it's been ground truthed. And when we know how things have recovered over the years and generations, we know how things are strong and have rebounded. And Western civilization has this psychosis of paralysis by analysis. And it's built dogmatic paradigms that are inflexible to current situations. And so what I ended up looking at is like, we have to have the best available science. We get into the framework of traditional ecological knowledge. And how do we frame that in a way of a living perspective that's influenced and informed with long-term observation? So you can't just have a scientist fresh with a new PhD come out and determine something when they don't even know what the hell was there 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And so we have all these assessments coming, from the likes of the National Marine Sanctuary System. And then some of the things too, when we got into a real public relations sort of counterpunch, where they decided to do a conditions report and they conjured up what this place was like 100 years ago. And then they placed our tribal people as cultural people adjacent to the sanctuary. And just those framework alone, they're already trying to distance ourselves from our connection to that water way before the sanctuary was born. And then through US versus Washington and treaty case law, the Makah tribe actually led the charge to bring the sanctuary into place to prevent oil and gas exploration. And then this extreme anti-fishing agenda tries to be imported from Washington, D.C. And we know there's a regional abundance of a lot of species of fish, like different rockfish species that we cannot avoid because they're so abundant. People in Oregon are trying to avoid them like the plague. So what we had to do, and we had to figure out, what is the stock structure of these same species? Do we have a separate viable breeding population? Therefore, we can refine and improve management to a higher degree of fidelity that, yes, we can manage our biomass within our adjudicated marine space. And so what I was working towards in that concept, back to the Vince Diaz thing, where he was able to digitize a virtual stellar navigation program, I was working on a 4-dimensional model of our UNA. And so our UNA is a fixed, space on the marine map. That's a 2-dimensional map. But when we get down to the seafloor mapping, the habitat mapping, the stock structure mapping, the modeling of the various species coming through, then we have a 4-dimensional model, because then you're bringing in the temporal time and the fluctuation of all of that. Then we can add into that model changes in different phenomena when we get the upwellings now with more acidification because of global carbon emissions is manifested in the ocean. We have a 40-year accumulation in the ocean and it sinks deep. And when that surface water comes up, it's highly corrosive and it's full of carbonic acid from decades of fossil fuel emissions. So we got to learn how to model those things that are part of the model. Temperature rise, water temperature rise, like we had a big phenomenon in the high North Pacific where the phytoplankton and zooplankton that was used to colder waters or warmer waters were way up north. And so the salmon were basically eating popcorn when they should have been eating these fatty omega-3 type of krill. And so salmon were coming back emaciated. And there's all these other drivers and factors. But I guess what I was getting at is like when a culture is now pitted in survival, balancing the paternalistic and colonialism over our resources because they want to exploit them, and then sometimes I honestly believe it's a overreaction, conservation hysteria, not even ground truth, when we've got the longest term observation. And so I guess in a visualization exercise like I was talking about earlier with that EPA thing on area of recoveries and what would this neighborhood want to see this polluted site become? I guess in a way I was thinking that this 4-dimensional model could be something that is just really based on vetted science that can be updated and validated as things change, so that then you can really honestly try to get to the most honest appraisal of what we really have and push all that hysteria aside. But I guess in a way too, defending treaty rights and defending a way of life, you know, can become, in some cases, can become very adversarial, especially when some people don't care about treaty rights and want to impose stuff because they feel all apocalyptic about stuff when they're really coming from an infantile civilization in some cases. But anyhow, my soapbox. I don't know what else to share other than just
Micah, your artwork. We would love to see examples of your artwork, because this is a group of cartoonists and people who love imagery. And I have watched you been a real powerhouse lately, just pumping out amazing artwork and also selling this wonderful work worldwide.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I don't think I was able to get a PowerPoint done ready, but this is a water spirit matriarch. And so this is one to honor the cleanliness of the streams that support salmon. And the design here, see, in a lot of our traditions, we use eagle down to bless something. If we're going to cleanse the floor and cleanse the floor of any bad feelings or anything, set the tone, we use eagle down. So we use sea sponges to make sort of this sponge work. And for me, it's representative of that eagle down. So she's blowing a blessing. She's blowing a blessing from her mouth for that cleanliness.
That's gorgeous. Well, Micah does beautiful drums, beautiful masks, paddles, paintings. He's been really producing a lot of beautiful work.
I had no idea that this is also Ukrainian colors in a way.
They are.
This was kind of influenced. I started this painting during the pandemic, before the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic. And quite frankly, it's getting really dark right now after the pandemic with the war.
Yeah.
So I had no idea that this, you know, this was a mid-pandemic inspired painting. Got the concept of many moons.
Some wonderful things.
And then this one, my first bentwood box I did with my son. You can see how this wood is bent right here and how I made the curves.
Does anybody here not know how the bentwood boxes are made? And perhaps Micah could tell us, because it's a fascinating and wonderful technology. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and the museum, although the Neo Bay's open too, if people want to come out to the museum, but the boxes were made for transporting wealth across many waters and things, and also made for cooking. And I mean, there's a lot of utilitarian ways that the boxes were used.
Well, what they do is they score the wood and they steam it, and then they're able, you know, they put like V-shaped scores in it, and then once it's steamed, they can close it together and fasten it together.
This is my first one.
It's really a beautiful technology.
I did this one over the stovetop. That other one I had to do over another thing, but I'm going to run out to my truck really quick. But before I do, I'm going to, oh yeah, this is the cover art for The Sea Is My Country.
Oh, beautiful.
And so the cover art also involves, I wrote the afterword instead of the forward. And the story is really reminiscent of survival of culture through the endurance of very violent colonial disruption to our traditional way of life. And I descend from one of the most powerful chiefs at the time when Neutrano commanded and controlled the commerce all around us. And the book written by Joshua Reed even got into sea captains from the United States, because we had the Spanish fort here in 1790. In fact, my mom's first job was working for the chairman for the lady that lived in that little house where the Spanish fort stood. It's interesting family history, because later on I signed a peace treaty with the Kingdom of Spain on that same location. But so this really is embodiment of, you know, you see a house design, you see a super layer of, you know, there's a layer of a Thunderbird head that's morphed into a moon design, and then there's a sea monster. But we have our word for the newcomers here. We call them Babashed. And what it meant is like the people that live on houses on the water, because our longhouses were wood, and the boats that came looked like wooden houses that came on the water. And so what this is hereditary territory. Like for me, it would be my Hautli, and that my Hautli would be my responsibility to maintain and manage my Hautli for the benefit of my people, and for how I could leverage the wealth of my people to create more alliances and things like that. The collection of all of the Hautlis of the New Chanoth is, New Chanoth means all along the mountains. And so I'll go outside real quick. It's a kind of a good day, you can see it. But if you look at Vancouver Island behind me, all the mountains go all the way up. And from here, you can almost see, if it's not cloudy, that direction right there, you can see almost the end of Vancouver Island. All along those mountains is our New Chanoth territories. And the Hautlis, all together, is called the Chadi. And so if you look at the dark coloring of that, you remember the dark coloring of that painting I just showed you, that's reminiscent, or that's indicative of the dark cloud and storm of colonialism that came into the Chadis. And you know, our cultural survival and all of that, you know, is tied to, I think, the fortitude of our people. A lot of people don't realize that 70% of the Makahs were killed 3 years before the Treaty of Nia Bay, 1855. They deliberately and intentionally attacked us with smallpox once they realized that the constitution of our bodies was compromised, because we had been introduced so many sugars and flours and different kinds of Western foods, and we were no longer eating our foods like we used to as much. And so the Indian agents studied how easily we got sick with different things that they brought into our village. And then when they realized that we're more susceptible to the common cold and flu and shit like that, they're like, all right, let's give them smallpox again. And coincidentally, my mom comes from New England, and I thumbed through a Bible printed in England in 1590 that came over with the first boats. My mom's family was the first to put up trading posts in New England, and the only people that could finance that was the lords. And Lord Jeffrey Amherst is one of my mom's recent ancestors. And Lord Jeffrey Amherst is one of the only Englishmen actually tied to a paper trail, deliberately instructing his people to give smallpox to the Indians. So in some of my travels, when I was on tribal council, in 1997, the U.S. delegation was about to back out of a whaling quota request at the International Whaling Commission in Monaco. And at the time, it was really based on a bunch of drivel. A couple of our tribal leaders that were there, it's like, if you're gonna fold your cards, U.S. delegation, on this. We're going to go back and get a humpback. And so the U.S. delegation actually they actually called Al Gore in the middle of the night to get approval to broker a deal with Russia. And the Alaskan Eskimo Whaling Commission had been working with the Russian Eskimos, the Chukchis. And so the California, Eastern Pacific gray whale population goes up, and they're hunted by the Chukchi people. They pass through Makah and they go down to Baja California. They're the longest migratory whale migration route that's known. Anyhow, long story short, in '97, on a midnight hour, the senior officials at the administration approved a brokering for Makah to piggyback on the Russian whale quota. And so at that time, there was a guy named Roman Abramovich who was the governor of the Russian Far East in Chukotka. And one of the Russian interpreters that worked both with the Alaskan Eskimo Whaling Commission and the U.S. delegation and the Russian delegation to the IWC, a friend of mine became a senior policy advisor for Roman Abramovich. Roman Abramovich was a toy salesman in Moscow, and he had an oligarch take him under his wing when he knew Perestroika and Glasnost was coming in, and he knew that they were going to be able to privatize and bring in Western money. The oligarch that brought Roman in under his wing was starting to be, he was starting to get concern over tax evasion, and so he took a bunch of his money into self-exile in London. Roman decided to broker a deal with Russia. At the same time, he ran for governor of the Russian Far East to become a political liability or political connection, and he became part of Putin's inner circle. And then he sold 70% of his shares of Gazprom back to the Russian Federation for like $13 billion. And then while my friend was working for Roman, he had a checkbook and had a host of 13 Russian governors that came over to Alaska. We took a tour around Anchorage, and we went down to Sitka to visit the Russian capital in Alaska. A couple years ago, there was a Russian-American company being researched by the Russian Geographic Society, and Alitsky, I can't think of his last name, but he is the president of the Russian American Society, and he wanted to follow the trail of the St. Nikolai. And St. Nikolai was one of the Russian ships that came out of Sitka and crashed down south of Nia Bay. Long story short, the crew was eventually picked up. And again, that president of the Russian Geographic Society is another one of, part of the, Kremlin inner circle. But after all of that history, actually my buddy, John Tahotsky, he bought a mask he gifted to Roman. And then I was on my German Marshall Fund Fellowship in 2005, and I had secured an invitation to go sit with Roman Abramovich in the owner's box at a Chelsea game. But I was under contract with the German Marshall Fund to have the last dinner in Paris. And then I had some questions about, well, I would have to charge this to the tribal credit card, and how can I justify that to travel expenses for my tribal government? In 2005, I was working on an agenda. 2002, the Japanese whalers held the Alaskan Eskimo Whaling Commission quota request hostage. And they had to do an emergency intercessional to get a quota request. And so the next Aboriginal subsistence whaling quota was going to be in 2007. And so in 2005, I took that whaling agenda to my European Union thingy. And then coincidentally, when I was working on that Spanish Fort project to honor all of our veterans and the Spanish monument, I became friends with Luis Fernando Esteban, who's the consulate general for Kingdom of Spain, and a personal friend of the King of Spain. He grew up with him. And Luis Fernando had a college roommate named Jose Manuel Barreras. And during that time, Jose Manuel Barreras was the president of the European Commission. And so, you know, when I was, coincidentally too, when I was on this German Marshall Fund Fellowship, we had a dinner in Slovakia, and we met a GMF operative who was part of the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. And he had just come through Belarus via Poland, working with the protesters that were railing against, what's his name? Can't think of his name now, but anyhow, so I started listening to the news. I'm listening to different things going on since the war happened. And I'm like, shit, Roman Abramovich is in the news. He's got 2 of my masks. I wonder what he's up to. And then it turns out he was asked by people in Ukraine to broker a peace deal because they knew he was in Putin's inner circle. And so if you can see right here, now you got the background story. This orange symbol, or the yellow symbol that I superimposed on the white side of the flag, the Russian flag color, because a Russian was trying to broker peace on behalf of Ukraine, I put the symbol of the Ukrainian armed forces, the coat of arms, I superimposed on the Russian flag. And that's also a tribute to all the Russians that laid down their arms and walked away from the fight. It's also a symbol of the Russians that, you know, protested on TV, you know, that, you know, and then on this side is the Ukrainian flag. And then that's like a symbol of higher power for truth and peace. So this is like one of my first social justice masks during this time. And in fact, there was another oligarch, Oleg, I can't think of his last name, but at the same time, one of our Makah fisheries, the value went through the roof. And with all this new Russian money, they drove the price of some of our fisheries through the roof. And there was a lot of Russian money ended up buying a bunch of our fish. So it's kind of a crazy, you know, globalization thing. Another factoid that kind of drives my inspiration too sometimes is that my mom's teacher from Cape Elizabeth area in near Portland, Maine, she had a schoolhouse, like Little House on the Prairie, you know, multiple grades. And her teacher was Admiral Perry's niece. And we have an interesting connection here in Nia Bay that's tied to the Hudson Bay Company. There was a Japanese shipwreck that washed ashore at Ozette. And what happened was the Japanese sailors were actual like Shinto monks, and they had a cargo of sake in big barrels, and they were lost at sea for so long. There was a couple of them that had perished, and they were buried, they were entombed in the sake barrels because the monks intended to bring their bodies back to temple or whatever. And the Makahs were, you know, pretty savvy to new people, always wanted to learn new things. We quickly adapted to new things. Like when we first got steel, we didn't go back to our shell harpoons. We didn't go back to shell knives. We had adapted with things that made the most sense while maintaining our cultural identity. But the Hudson Bay Company decided to buy those Japanese monks. At the time, Japan had, you know, a closed system. Like they didn't want any foreigners. They didn't want their closed society to be contaminated. And so when the Japanese officials realized that their monks were coming back as Christians, because the Hudson's Bay Company took those Japanese monks through London, Christianized them, and then tried to bring them into Tokyo. And so the imperial authorities in Tokyo fired cannon on that British flag vessel, and that became international incident under Admiralty law, which didn't matter to Japan, but it mattered to Admiral Perry, who was in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, I guess. And Admiral Perry got the message from the kingdom and the alliance that the U.S. had. And so Admiral Perry went into Tokyo Harbor guns blazing and kicked the door to trade open in Japan. Just a like minor interesting, factoid. And then, yeah, it's kind of fun. So I mean, I embrace family history. I embrace who I am and where I come from on both my mom and dad's side. And I know that a lot of old blood and old connections across Europe is tied to a lot of family histories that are probably more intact than some. But I don't know. So that's some of the influences in some of my most current art. I have another one that's kind of interesting. I was born on the winter solstice, and I call this the Solstice Dinner. It's a design that I've done a few times, different renditions. And then I'll show, I'm working on a larger rendition of it. Let's see. There's some kind of different design work. It's about the same almost. And then this one's kind of a fun one. So this was a commemorative one. I'd done a lot of different things throughout Indian country, national, regional, local, and really advanced a lot of sort of diplomatic advances in mutual benefit public policy. And Evergreen State College decided they needed to have a new position to create new opportunity for me. So they developed a special assistant to the president for tribal government relations position. And while I was there, tribal leaders were gathering for ATNI, affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians. And they knew that since the dawn of like the tribal journeys and the Centennial Accord, see, when Washington State was becoming a state, there was a prerequisite to fund public education. And the only way you can fund public education if you had a taxable base. And so all of the ceded lands that the tribes gifted to the United States government in exchange for promised protections of our existing, our rights and tradition, our culture, hunting and fishing, we gave the United States the responsibility to honor our treaty rights. The United States did not give the rights to us. And in exchange, the United States, received large land conveyances that became the taxable base to fund public education. And so when we have a Centennial Accord celebrating the statehood and the state tribal relationships, I always framed it in the sense, because of the flow of powers, that the state government of Washington State is a junior government to my government and all the other tribes. And it's like this anyhow. But beyond that, so this was one of my first photo collages. I did a hand cut photo collage. And what I did was I took, I don't know if I turn that light off, can you guys see it? There we go. Is that better? I'm trying to find a better way to hold it where it's not, is that a better view of it? Ever got a chance to take a good look at it? Okay. So this is a petroglyph from Ozette. This is a petroglyph found in the Puget Sound, and this is a petroglyph found in up by Colville. And those petroglyphs were carved in stone way before statehood. And then sort of the matriarchal aspect of women's handwork with the basketry. Like, this is my grandma. And then, so then this is like the flora and fauna of the land. And so nowhere in this design do you see the word state of Washington. It's embodied in what was there before and what still grows here now. And so that was through my mom wrote the founding documents to start the Evergreen State College Longhouse. And then the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs was one of his other things. And that's one of my early drums. But yeah, I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole ton of other stuff like readily available to show, but
Well, I know that you're part of teaching carving to many of the young people, and you've been sharing wonderful photographs of people working on some of the big canoes.
oh yeah,
Younger people, girls as well as boys, working
Yep.
on them, carving them, which is an important step. And these are the big ones, really huge ones. Micah's, if you really want to see Micah's artwork, go to his Facebook page and follow down what he does, because he just turns out the most amazing masks and drums and other amazing work. And you can get a deeper look at the work through there. As I think you've seen that our speaker here is multi-leveled with many contacts.
Yeah,
Oh, and
multifaceted, interdisciplinary.
interdisciplinary. I just want to really quickly, since this is wonderful. One of the wolf masks.
It's a raven.
Oh, it's a raven. Okay,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
gorgeous.
cool.
Isn't that beautiful? Is it finished, or is there
No,
anything?
I still got to paint the eyes and the lips. It's almost
That is
done.
gorgeous.
Look.
You just wear it on top of your head?
Well, this one's going to be more ornamental, but it would be worn. Yeah, I haven't got into a plasma cutter. This is one of my early practices on a plasma cut.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of fun. But I've been working into just different multimedias.
Nice.
So I was telling you about the Spanish Fort site, and you can see a lot of that stuff in my Facebook and whatever, but this is my mom's Alabush poem.
Oh yeah.
And so that's when she was taking care of the oldest lady in the village on a site. I later rose the Spanish flag on the site the Spanish fort stood.
Yeah. Oh, Micah, could I ask, we have heard that Nia Bay has again accepted visitors.
Yep, wide open.
Wow, is there any possibility of Makah days this year, and or will it be limited?
I think we're going to have Makah days. I don't know if it's going to be limited. We'll have a lot of time between now and then.
No, congratulations if it happens.
Yeah. Oh, and then this one's my son's.
Oh, it's beautiful. Your son carved that?
Yep. He didn't want any help from me except for a few pointers. So this is like 95% all him.
Gorgeous.
Cool.
Really nice.
It's very recent.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful piece.
Thank you. So I've been integrating some things like this this wall here. It's like what it would look like, kind of like a longhouse. Of course, a little more modern and cleaner cut. But I've been looking at doing different, interior design features like that. And then I think I did one. I didn't get into fully renovating that, but I have this here. Oh yeah, and then I was raised in the Baha'i faith. And the 9-pointed stars is, major symbol for the Baha'i faith. And when I was talking about Tatoosh, and if you look at that book, The Sea is My Country, Tatoosh is a huge, one of the 3 most powerful chiefs. At the time, they were all in power together. Maquina was up in the north end, Wakinanish was in the middle central area, and then Tatoosh was here in Nia Bay. I went to a big council of chiefs with my dad, probably 2006 or so, and there was one of the chiefs named Tatoosh somehow knew I was raised Baha'i, And he said, all those chiefs in there, Micah, they're Baha'is. They just don't know it because our teachings are just like Baha'i. And like we have an understanding among our teachings, like when the Christians came, we were not surprised at the miracles of the Bible. We had already had teachings similar to that. And think about what's going on today in the world. Being raised as a Baha'i, I was taught that different messengers of God came to different places on the planet at different times. It's up to us to understand that the soul filament and the truth and divinity of those teachings is from the same source. And think about that same consensus of what it means to be an indigenous person from the land. So there's a lot of commonalities and a lot of teachings that are just, widespread around the planet, even though we may have been carrying those teachings in different cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. And then another illustration I'm working on, and what I've done in some of my public speaking, is told a story about how there was this mountaintop, and the Great Flood was turning that mountain into an island. All these animals were getting crowded on that mountaintop, and then all of a sudden they started getting into each other's space. They couldn't spread out. They were getting crowded, and then they had a sense of panic. All the animals cried to the Creator for salvation in the same voice, unified voice. And then the water started rising like a wall around them, and then they were surrounded by the cylinder of water. And after the water stopped rising, there was a voice from the Creator that spoke back in the same tongue that they cried for salvation. And the message was that you stay in this spot safely together and don't harm each other. Predators don't kill the prey. As long as you live in peace while you're trapped here, you can safely reach into that wall of water and get seaweeds to eat. You can get a fish for the meat eaters. And so that's how they were able to maintain their survival on that mountain until the floodwaters receded. But that story in a lot of places, like when I think about the traditional area and territory that I was a steward of, I was a lead trustee. That our tribe, our island, like we shut down. We were that inside that wall of water when we had our COVID lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Our tribal governments are, in those silos of water surrounded by, sort of a cancer on the land. With the colonial disruption, the heat island of Seattle that's killing salmon habitat. We're flushing potable water down the toilet, draining salmon habitat. We don't even integrate gray water systems to more wisely use our water. So there's a lot of things that, we need to do to visualize how we can mitigate these things and design and
Mm-hmm.
help people understand that there are preferred alternatives. Like in Tokyo, you can wash your hands over the reservoir into your toilet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different systems that, and even in Israel, there's irrigation systems that have been designed to be the wisest use for water. And one of the other pieces I was working with was called Changing Currents Water Summit with AT&I, and we kind of doing that creative visioning exercise on how do we develop processes and collaborations and different things where we bring all the constituents together. We bring local and state and regional governments to work with
Mhm.
tribal governments and federal governments, academic partners, and how do we design better use management of, existing systems, and the confluence of, irrigation for, archaic agricultural practices that are not only draining water, but also spewing, toxins back into salmon habitat.
Mm-hmm.
But if people are stuck in a polarity and they get very positional in their defense of what they're doing, they don't realize that, the preferred alternative is actually more sustainable and cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And actually UBS, United Bank of Switzerland, has a division for sustainable investment opportunities for people that have you know, a sustainable investment portfolio priority.
Hmm.
And in the long run, business models that are built in sustainability are actually more profitable because they're more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in performance for investment, just checks and balances, it performs better. But sometimes I tell people we got to think outside the box, even if it's organic. Even if it's a recycled paper, organic, blah, blah, blah. You got to think outside of it because you can't be so dogmatic about it. Because situations change. Like, I know, Donna, you've seen my posts, but one of my analogies.
You've probably seen mine.
I've seen, you know, but one of my analogies in some of my talks was like, you know, in the 70s, you know, we might have had 10,000 returning salmon to a river system and just maybe a handful of seals and sea lions.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a couple thousand returning and we've got hundreds of seals and sea lions. Like, it's so out of balance. Like, you know, the fact that, you know, 100% of the California sea lions up here decimating salmon are adult males. It's a learned behavior. Started with Herschel. They abandoned their women pups down in California a couple years ago, and there was not enough fish for them down there. And so there was a mass premature weaning of pups because there's so many California sea lions on the California coast. There's not enough fish to support them. They weren't making enough milk. So all these sea lion mothers abandoned their pups. Meanwhile, all the dads are up here killing off all the salmon because we can manage ourselves, but we can't get past the, you know, the dogma of the sacred cow of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, even in the face of the Endangered Species Act. We have Endangered Species Act salmon in recovery with plans and millions of dollars to do this. But oh no, we can't find a way to bring balance. I mean, like, maybe a spay and neutering program. I don't know if we got to find a way to
It's
do it.
worked with
Non-lethal, you know,
donkeys and horses, so
well, yeah, but you know, I mean, but who's going to design that and all that, and then, you know, who
oh, it's
gets, you
just
know,
tranquilizer guns, and that they have actually
yeah.
there are spaying and neutering. They don't hold the horses down. It's done with shots.
All right.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
yeah, I
could
could
actually
probably
do that.
chemically do
Yeah,
it. Yeah, you
yeah.
could
No,
probably
they're
chemically.
not holding animals down and cutting them open. That's not how they do it.
Yeah. No, I
There's
get it. I'm
always
just,
ways to do it, but
yeah,
but
I'm sure.
anyway, what I wanted to say was we usually, and I just want to ask this for our readership here. Usually these go about an hour, okay, and it started at 5:30. So if I mean, this has been
Oh, it's
fascinating.
7.
It's
Okay.
7:12. But the thing is, if anybody's got what we might want to do is simply because of the way people schedules and things, we might want to think about wrapping up. But I think it's important if anybody has any questions or anything specifically about your art,
Sure.
I'm sure that people would like to ask.
Yeah.
Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, I'm free for a bit.
Okay. Anybody? I have 2, but if anybody else has anybody,
Well, if you have two, go ahead, please, Bill.
Okay.
I'm sure it'll be interesting, something interesting.
yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of the high-tech projection and photographs project you've done, as well as how Makah are always open to new systems. Do you find that there is a balance between preserving the traditional culture and then moving forward?
Yeah, like how would you frame that?
I'm not sure, but
Are you talking art technologies, Bill?
not just technology, but personal styles. I'm probably misphrasing this.
Well,
Personal
he's
style.
been Micah, if you don't mind me telling Bill, Micah has been showing you the traditional native form line design.
Right. Yes.
And I think you're asking whether there might be artwork that takes both from the Makah culture, the native cultures, and other cultures. Is that what you're trying to say?
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. I like to do a game called Scribble.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know Scribble?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm open to things. I mean, I've been thinking about doing, you know, some collaborative work. And in fact, you know, with this piece I'm working on with the animal skin project,
Mhm.
and then I'm also being invited to talk about collaborating with the Van Gogh experience. The purveyor of the Van Gogh experience has been working with a few Indians I know that are working with various intertribal governments. And so I could be in a position soon to be the Northwest Native Content director for a Van Gogh experience that would illustrate all the tribes around here.
Mhm.
And of course, salmon is a major fundamental piece to that. But that would definitely, you know, a lot of different sort of venues of technology, or, you know, different technical capacities and whatnot. But yeah, what kind of ideas did you have about collaboration or new things, or what did you have in mind?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I'm sure you saw that sort of native comic that was sort of doing a graphic novel in the form of or at least in the composition of a Northwestern blanket that was around a
Oh,
couple of years
mm-hmm.
ago. That's one, and there was a few displays that they had at the Seattle Art Museum.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the one that always sticks in my mind is the form line version of a stormtrooper helmet.
Oh yeah, of course.
As
Oh,
well as somebody.
that's the gentleman from Port Gamble.
Mhm.
That particular artist. Oh, I can't
Well,
remember
I'm
the
showing
name
somebody what
right
I'm
now, but you know
doing.
what I mean.
And then there was a very interesting, amusing one where this one artist did a sort of as a parody and editorial doing native versions of children's cereals boxes.
Oh yeah.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I love that. There's a whole genre of that happening where it's like a reverse of cultural appropriation and sort of decolonization. There's a social
Uh,
justice factor to that. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of doing that.
yeah.
You know, it's like I think about different cartoon characters, and like even like when I was younger, you know, I heard stories. I grew up about, you know, knowing what the chiefs were like and the war chiefs. Like one of the stories, you know, like when I was telling you guys earlier, when the Northern Newfoundland, they hired Haida mercenaries to come take our territory,
Hmm.
and we were outnumbered 4-1. My village was the war chief council village. We set a lot of policy among the 5 villages, and we set up a system. We had about 2,000 commando type trained warriors, and so when a fleet of canoes came to storm the beach, we didn't let one canoe, that first wave, we didn't let one canoe touch the beach. We slaughtered them in the surf. And the other canoes that were waiting to come in to attack just turned around and left. And then there was another one where there was a fog bank in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and there was an Elwha war fleet coming to attack us. And we ambushed them in the fog and slaughtered the whole fleet of canoes. I guess my point being, in a young man's point of view, is like, you know, think about how badass and bloodthirst and, you know, warrior this, and I made a lot of whalebone war clubs, and so I had a graphic novel thinking like, you know, like heavy metal,
Hmm.
and I was like, well, I could do a heavy metal thing where, like, damn, this war chief, he's got 3 wives, he's in this longhouse, and you know, there's a war happening on the beach, and he's like, damn, I still got to take care of this at the house before I go. And like, then he comes out and he's got 2 whalebone war clubs, and then he joins the battle and changes the tide of the battle and finishes off the attack. That was just an idea in my head, just some kind of a fantasy,
I'd read it.
right?
Oh, and could I interject here, because I don't know how much longer people can stay. I know that normally we don't schedule for this, but there is, if I could mention, going on the weekend of like the 8th or 9th, something you'd have to look at it, is SquatchCon. And it originated in some of those old Sasquatch conventions. but
Mm,
it's Port Angelus's very first Comic Con. And I'm going to go
nice.
ahead and type this in swatchconpa.com, and that'll give you the full information on it. And I'm heavily involved in it simply because, as you might all know, I was the one that ran the Comic Cons up here,
Yeah.
and I'm able to get everybody connected. And I think Jess has already, who runs the Comic Con, has already got connected with Micah about maybe having a Legends panel next year, because it's kind of short notice, especially for an artist who's as busy as Micah. But I really recommend everybody go look
See
at that.
this?
Oh, gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. But go take a look at that and get involved, because we need everybody to be involved in that. That's beautiful.
And then this one is sort of one of the whaling matriarchs. This one's based on the story of a princess, the Hakum, that was married to the chief of humpback whales. And in the story here, she takes the form of a whale and she gets homesick. And so she swims offshore to the village and she sings. And then there's a thunder cloud over the village. And there's actually an Indian name for that. One of my close friends, Clotismiat, her name means brings thunder. And she is a whaling princess.
That's gorgeous.
But yeah, and that's one of them. Trying to think of what else I have. Oh, this is my most recent one. I just sold this one.
Oh,
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah,
yeah.
she's a medicine woman, healer.
I know
Yeah.
that some of my friends on Facebook have contacted Micah, and he has done them some beautiful masks and I believe some drums.
This one, oh, I got to show you this one. After I signed the peace treaty, that's a mask of noble friendship, gifted in honor of the fact that I signed a treaty with another hereditary system. And so it's a mask of noble friendship, you know, hereditary to another hereditary. And I used the colors of the Spanish flag.
Was that dinner? I believe I was there covering that as for the newspapers.
Yeah. And then there was a dissertation, or there was a research project done. Quileutes were trying to claim macaws didn't hunt close to them like we always did. So they challenged our hunting rights, and we had a anthropologist do research. We would go up to the mountain meadows in the Olympic Mountains to get elk. And it's those mountain elk that we got the antlers for the whaling gear. And in my acknowledgement of that tradition, I don't think it was just the men that went there. And so this is my idea of an alpine medicine woman, a woman that goes with the party and gathers medicine in the alpine meadows. And again, I guess that might be sort of that, respect to the matriarchs.
Well, one thing about your art is it takes such recognition and advantage of the wood itself.
Yeah.
There's a lot of clear space of wood.
Right. And so then here's artwork being gifted to the King of Spain. I gave him a whaler's hat, another hereditary symbol, like, whaling chiefs. It's kind of like a crown in a way. And that was at the University of Washington Study Center in Lyon. And then Senator Akaka. And you see, it's not my work, but you can see my tie has Native American designs in it. So I guess in a way, doing different things, like taking Darth Vader and putting formline design into it. Yeah, there's a lot of different things I've been working on for that sort of concept as well. I've done some fashion designs. I haven't done them into into garments yet or anything, but
well, if you can make it to SquatchCon PA, if you can make it down there, bring your designs, or at least go in and so it is a local Comic Con. Bring your work.
Oh,
nice.
Isn't that gorgeous?
That's etched glass. And so it's hard to tell, but it's called the third strike. And if you could see it in person with better detail, the first harpoon strike is the harpoon head that's tied to the rope. And in the design, the guy right behind the killing lance man is holding a rope. You can see the line. It's kind of hard to see. I'm trying to find a better way to hold it.
Actually, it's pretty good.
Okay. And so right behind the flipper, the pectoral fin, where the line, you can see a blood, a gush. It's a baby whale symbol coming out of the whale's blood.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, I was telling, this is my daughter's though. I was telling you about the cosmos.
Oh.
Ooh, wow.
So it's a skatefish. She did a bunch of them, but they're nosing into the Big Dipper design.
Now that's
gonna be a silk
hand
scarf.
painted.
No, she digitized this.
This digitized, so she probably used the Mandela, because that's
Yeah.
gorgeous.
I'll see,
Using the
yeah.
symmetry function.
Yeah, and then that's this is one of my ceremonial pieces.
Ooh.
It's another wolf one.
Yeah. Well, this
Gorgeous.
one's got the sea serpent. The jawline comes back behind the eye.
Uh-huh.
On a wolf, the jawline stops before the eye starts generally.
Okay.
But this one's almost both ways. I would use it as a wolf headdress, but it has a sea serpent headdress on top, or a sea serpent design on top. And then it's mounted on a whalebone.
It's amazing. That's another thing about this design form. It's like an alphabet. You have to know what you're doing or you're not going to do it right. It's not going to read correctly.
All right.
It takes a lifetime of study.
I just did this design for a box. I'm going to put it on a box. It's a
Oh, that's
frog.
good.
I'm glad I bought this phone. It's got a big screen. It's one of those new Samsung flips, because I can
Yeah.
fold it up and
Oh, neat.
Wow.
yeah.
Now everybody wants one.
I know it's one of my new toys. But I got it so I could show artwork. So yeah, I get to demonstrate it.
So cool. Well, that's one of the problems we've had with these meetings is trying to help people to demonstrate what they have with the technology.
Oh, here's one. I didn't get a chance to talk too much about this. But I did some ocean policy work.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
So
Wow.
4 of the worst oil spills in Washington state history. This is an artist that did this design based on the work I did to bridge a better working relationship with the U.S. Coast Guard. So that's the, oops. So that's like a whaling chief. The wolves are protectors. So the bottom is the wolf design. You got the American eagle, and then the Makah thunderbird, and then the zenith of, you know, our territorial management is, you know, like the chiefs.
Mhm.
So, you know, 4 of the worst oil spills in Washington state history happened in our territory. We had to change the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act. Oh yeah, here's a replica of that Japanese shipwreck.
Oh, yeah.
When that guy came from Moscow from the Geographic Society of Russia, we were going to do a St. Nikolai project. But it's so crazy that my mom's, you know, little connection to Admiral Perry, who got involved from what happened after that shipwrecked in Ozette.
It's amazing.
So this is my grandpa. He was the first chairman of the Makah tribe.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And that symbol on the drum, that symbol on the drum, that sea monster with the sea serpent coming out of its mouth, that's in the design of the let me go get it. It's in the design of that. You can see the sea monster in the face of that house.
Nice. Oh, cool.
Mm.
Yeah. So I was able
Wonderful.
to tie that because what it was it symbolic of too is it's not just like the, you know, surviving the, you know, the violence of colonialism, but it's the strength of the great houses of the New Chanoth people.
Mhm.
And so, like, you know, thinking about my bloodline and my hereditary stuff, you know, I come from a house, you know, and that one with the guy with the head, I showed you that one picture. There's a song we have where he's singing a song to that chief, says, I come from a house of great power. And that's one of the stories of how Hishka, this man's father, was one of the last headhunters. There was a chief to the east of us that tried to keep his whaling gear.
I know this one.
Oh yeah, here's a modern twist to a halibut hook design.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter was able to digitize that real good too. Took my hand drawing.
And isn't there somebody who has completely rebuilt and restudied the halibut hook culture, or all the hook cultures up there, and has relearned how to do all of those hooks?
Yeah, and I've actually done a lot of that myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I should get back to changing back to what I'm doing. Oh, I told you about the salmon story.
Mm-hmm.
So those designs are going to go on that Chief Seattle Club building in Seattle. So that's I did the hand drawing, and then my daughter put them onto the computer and then digitized it and then changed the designs a little bit.
Mm.
But so yeah, so I was able to find out what I was doing here, so you guys could I could show you guys.
Yeah. We're just
But
a bunch of artists.
Oh yeah, okay, here it is. So there's a hand drawing version.
Oh yeah.
Pink female spawning. But yeah, I should get going. If there's any other questions, I could take, you know, one or two, but I should get blazing here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for showing up. Sorry about the possible technical problems at the beginning. It's always a Zoom thing.
No problem. Oh yeah, remember the Centennial Accord I was telling you about, 25
Oh,
years.
yeah.
That's the other design. See, they ended up using the whale that I had in my cutout.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of history. Oh, I know there's one. Oh, I should go. I love sharing though. That's part of my thing.
Well, you got to come to SwatchCon. Bring your stuff. Come
Yeah.
see people. Bring the
Oh,
kids, because they'll love to come to a
oh yeah,
Comic-Con.
I said I was doing fashion designs.
Ooh.
That's formline design.
Yeah.
So there was a Native American movie star that asked me to do a design she could wear on the red carpet.
Nice.
The one that was playing Tinsel Corey was her name. She played the girlfriend in the Twilight series. Remember, Forks was all crazy about Twilight. Well, she came to Niabe, and I did a public relations event for her. Did a gathering at the school for the kids to meet her. But yeah, I should get going though. Appreciate everybody listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Oh,
you.
It was a pleasure.
And thanks for inviting me. I'm open to, you know, future collaborations and whatnot. Like,
mhm.
I know, like, sometimes, you know, taking a story and illustrating it, sometimes it takes a team of people to do it all. You know, but something to think about.
Definitely.
I've got some people in Seattle that are really good at grant writing and putting together proposals and collaborations. And when I come out of this, especially when I get into the Van Gogh deal, I mean, I'm always going to have to focus on a lot of the other native storytellers and whatnot, but I want to get into multicultural aspect of it, because remember I was saying how we're surrounded, our all of our reservations are like inside cylinders of water, like the flood story, but we come and go in and out of our flood zone. And we have a lot of friends across cultural ties. And to balance that story with that experience to who we are and where we come from now.
Well, you made a bunch more friends here tonight. I know.
Right?
Made a
Right
bunch
on.
more.
Okay.
Let's think about it. But I should get going. Just plant the seed and see how it grows.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Micah.
All right.
That was so much fun.